Hey now, happy Tuesday. Good morning, PASW staff, clients, and friends joining us. Yesterday was a little scary with Nosferatu. So get me, some results in by today. Tuesday would be great. Hope it wasn't too scary. It's cool that 100 years ago the movie came out. It must have terrified audiences in Berlin, but then got suppressed and came out in 1929. But very, very. And why is it important? It set a template for horror movies to come. And especially all those shadows and the black and white, and all that German expressionism that we talked about. Horror movies, horror directors and screenwriters thought, wow, visually we have the ability to make something very moody and scary. So let's use this formula, because the formula worked, it still works today. And so so that's why that movie is important, and that scene is really all the music so far that some of you guys have sent has worked really well. So we'll see the film scoring results on Friday, and like I said, this is German. This is a week of German music. So Hans Rudmann is the composer. So he was a German composer and film composer in the 20s and the 30s. So I don't know that much about him, and I didn't pick the movie because of his music, because the music works fine in it. But I thought we should, last week we did French music, this week German music. So I thought, instead of revisiting Bach, which we could because Bach was German, and that mostly all Western music a lot of it starts in Germany. I thought we should look at Mendelssohn. We talked about Felix Mendelssohn, and here's why I want to revisit. Well, let's look at his life, and then I'll tell you why we looked at this. If you don't know Mendelssohn, you know his music, in particular one piece that we're going to look at the end of class that's played all of the time still. He wrote some just wonderful pieces of music. Let's early romantic, kind of classical composer. So we'll get into his life. He was a pianist, composer, organist, conductor of the early romantic period, and he wrote symphonies, concertos, piano music, organ music. He wrote 5 operas, 11 symphonies. He did it all, and he really did all of the best work before he was 20 years old. So we got to get over there. We were in Burbank with Fantasia and Disney, so let's go over to Hamburg. We're not going to be talking about the Beatles. The Beatles were in Hamburg, but a few hundred years later. This is when Mendelssohn's born in 1809. In Hamburg. He kind of grows up in Berlin, but he's born in Hamburg in Germany. And he dies in 1847 of a stroke at age 38. So, good thing he wrote most of his music before he was 20, because, he really didn't live that long. And we need our timeline. This is what we're looking at. He's kind of right when Wagner's starting, although their music sounds nothing alike, and they didn't like each other's music. Wagner was intensely romantic, as we know, and Mendelssohn was pretty conservative in his writing. He was very devout. He was so into Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, and continued in their style. So wasn't radical in any of his approaches to music, but very melodic composer. Robert Schumann, who's a great composer as well, called him the Mozart of the 19th century. He's Jewish. They convert to Christianity, but he's born in a pretty elite, wealthy family upbringing. His parents could provide pretty much in a small orchestra at their house every Sunday to perform works that he had done. He makes his first appearance when he's 9 years old. Now, his sister, Fanny Mendelssohn, is a very, very great composer herself. Of course, because she was a woman back then, she didn't get proper recognition, but she was very close to Felix, and both of them were very close to each other musically, and he would publish some of her music under his name just because it wasn't really allowed back then. Although she was encouraged to write, I mean, she was pretty supported by the family. Mendelssohn exhausted himself. By the time he could write music, I mean, he was trained, in piano and composition and counterpoint and all those things, but he composed 12 symphonies between the ages of 12 and 14. 12 symphonies. That's even surpassing Mozart. Mendelssohn was really responsible for making Bach famous again, and I said this in the Bach class. Now we're finally getting to Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn started performing a lot of his music at his own concerts. That he would put his music in, and then he would put Bach's music, and really brought Bach back to life. Some of the Romantic composers didn't like him, including Wagner, like we talked about, because he, like we said, I mean, and like we're listening to, it sounds kind of like an extension of Beethoven and Mozart. He's very much in the classical tradition. This is why it's early Romantic. It's not quite, it doesn't sound anything like Wagner. It doesn't sound anything like Tchaikovsky. Obviously, this is before, but he's very much in the tradition of reinventing the classical period, okay? Because, Mozart and Beethoven in the classical period. So he wants to kind of, his goal is to not go too far out of bounds with classical music or just music in general. He's kind of reinvigorating the old classical forms, just using a little bit more sophisticated orchestration. That's kind of what he's bringing to a modern twist of it, but staying in the traditional realm of Mozart and Beethoven. Probably his most famous piece is the overture to Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. He wrote this when he was 17. Brilliant. I mean, 17, gosh. And then with the incidental music for Midsummers, we see if you've heard this piece before. Yes, Mendelssohn wrote the famous wedding march that people still play today. So that's from 1842, Midsummer Night's Dream, and one of the best pieces of music history. I mean, it's still played. The wedding march is still played, and it was played at the marriage of Queen Victoria's daughter, Victoria, and in 1858, and after that it kind of became standard just to perform at weddings. Great piece. So you can hear it does sound very classical, like Beethoven and Mozart. The orchestration's a little bit more, a little bit more elevated, and that's what he's doing, but he's still staying in a kind of conservative classical way of writing. But there's melody, right? There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of tension in the orchestration. There's really beautiful parts of the music. That's a little taste of Felix Mendelssohn, and his sister Fanny wrote some beautiful music, and maybe we'll look at her at another class, because she was great. She suffered a stroke, and it really upset Mendelssohn, and he was very scared of suffering from a stroke as well. And he did, actually, 5 months after she died. So he died at 38, but lived a pretty good, happy life. No alcohol, no marriages. He was married, but just no money problems. Very, lived a life that I think he wanted to, but overworked himself a lot, I think. And before he died, he described death. Not that we're going to get into the philosophy of death, but his quote was, "Death is a place where it is to be hoped there is still music, but with no more sorrow and no more partings." So if there is an afterlife, if there is a heaven, or whatever you do believe in, We all have our own personal thing. After this, yes, let's hope that there is music there wherever we do end up, or whatever does happen. If there can be music, we all need and love music, right? I mean, all of us. I'm just sharing classical music with you today, but obviously you have your own personal music that you love, that you listen to every day, that you think about every day, even if you're not conscious of it. It's always going on in your brain, in the subconscious, in the unconscious. So yes, when death happens, hopefully there is still music, and no more sorrow or partings, because life is so full of sorrows and partings. So if we can have a little bit of music later on, because we're having fun with music as we're alive, but let's hopefully continue the fun, right? So I hope you enjoyed that. It's interesting for us to see transition periods in history. That's part of what's interesting in history. Leaps. How did so-and-so come and make a transition? So because we were talking about German music, and we will be this week, Mendelssohn comes along right when Wagner, and we're going to look at Wagner tomorrow. It's going to be a heavy class tomorrow. He and Wagner are born right around the same era, and of course, like we talked about in this class, Wagner didn't like Mendelssohn's music. It was a little bit, it was kind of not pseudo-romantic, but just it was too classical-like for Wagner. Wagner's not going to like that much, as we'll see tomorrow, because Wagner loves just intense romanticism, drenching you for 5-hour operas and romantic arias and all that stuff. Mendelssohn is German, Jewish, but German, and he's like we talked about, like we just looked at. He's going to take after Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, and he was responsible. We should thank him for making Bach famous, because Bach wasn't really that famous. He was very successful as a working man in his life, but he performed Bach's music he probably was responsible for us understanding, knowing Bach really well. So we should thank him for that, but also thank him for all the great music that he wrote. But he's going to start a transition from classical and leap to early romantic music, which is going to get us into romanticism. So maybe it would have happened regardless, but he's an important transition composer. I mean, that's not why he's important. He's important because he wrote some beautiful music. That's what we like. We like people that make history, but also if it's history with artistic integrity and all that stuff, because as we've looked at and listened to. And also, you know what, I wanted to play you a little bit of his sister's music, Fanny Mendelssohn, because I mentioned that in the class, and this piece is just gorgeous. She was a great composer in her own right, and just, it was weird that she died like 5 months before Felix did, and they both died of strokes, and that they were, he was terrified that he was going to die like that, but they're extremely close. But, and because of those times, women weren't considered composers, and I'm trying to think, aside from Nadia Boulanger, who tried her hand at composition, but found her way as a teacher, and her sister Lily was a composer. We didn't talk about her. We haven't really talked about female composers, and that's something I would like to learn about. And the more I learn, the more we learn together, that I want to share. So, but I did want to play, because Fanny, that piece was beautiful when I was listening to it, and I don't know much of Fanny's music, but just wanted to share that with you. Also, what's going to be fun is that we're going to see with Wagner, it's kind of a wedding theme this week too, because as we looked at with Mendelssohn, from Midsummer Night's Dream, the wedding march, that they play, but they probably still do it today. You guys know that wedding march. They, after the bride and groom, or the groom and groom, whoever, after they kiss, they walk down and everyone cheers. That's Mendelssohn's music. Tomorrow we're going to see what Wagner wrote, and Wagner wrote something that people use for weddings too. So it's interesting, these two German composers that didn't particularly like each other, or at least Wagner didn't like Mendelssohn, but traditionally they created something for weddings that we still use today. So there's that kind of parallel. So we'll get into Wagner tomorrow, but hope you enjoyed revisiting Mendelssohn's work. As a great German composer, and yeah, died way too young. So okay, get me Nosferatu stuff today. Tomorrow we're going to look at Wagner. Thursday, another German composer. Be very fun, and love you guys. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.